știm noi din vremuri strămoșești, cuvânt de dor și luptă, de doine și povești. Dar dacă astăzi pacea e lege și sfut, e pentru că pe lume partidul s-a născut. Țări pe drum știut, e pentru că pe lume partidul s-a născut. E pentru că pe lume partidul s-a dulci cuvinte le-am moștenit în grai, doar bănuiam ce-nseamnă ce tâlcuri au sub strai. Dar dacă astăzi tâlcul de plin l-am priceput, e pentru că pe lume partidul s-a născut. новостях в жизни важен первый шаг. Слышишь, реют над страною ветры яростных атак. И вновь продолжает собой, и сердцу тревожно в груди. И Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди. И Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди. Весть летит во все концы, вы поверьте нам, отцы, будут новые победы, станут новые бойцы. Милости не жди, жизнь для правды не щади. Нам, ребята, в этой жизни только с правдой по пути. И вновь продолжает собой, и сердце тревожно в груди. И Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь.
Hello everybody and welcome along. It is the return of a regular live stream session. Have not done one of these for quite some time. So thanks to everybody who's joined us thus far. We will be taking comments, etc. Later on in the show. But yes, thank you to everybody. We are currently live on X and YouTube and Twitch and Rumble and Substack as well, hopefully. Let me just check in over there, make sure that we are actually live. Yes, we are indeed, thanks to those of you who have joined us on the Substack platform. Yes, we are here tonight to respond to questions, talk about a couple of things, and generally provide an alternative way for you to see out the weekend, shall we say. So be sure to like and share this stream if you have not done so already, and we will get into the mix here. So I see we've got a few comments coming in already. Somebody tried to assassinate Trump again, apparently. Well, that's that's certainly what it's being presented as. Quite what is actually the case is another matter entirely. Apparently, like somebody tried to a man called Cole Thomas Allen, who's 31 years old, was arrested at the hotel where one of the most vile events in the Washington calendar was taking place, which is, of course, the White House Correspondents' Dinner, an assembly of some of the worst people in the United States, and therefore some of the very worst people in the entire world. And this guy, Cole Allen, was arrested with a gun there, having had apparently his internet search history showed he's searching for Israeli related terms spiked in the last week. So anyway, putting it rather bluntly, I think that this thing is quite frankly fake as fuck. Like it's like a low energy psyop from like the Trump gang. I think that they realize that their man is becoming about as popular as a nettle rash on the ball sack. So they need to do something to reinvigorate things. So having like a radical seeming black guy be the potential assassin is probably seemed like a good move to these people. But what I think, I mean, what it'll be is this guy's online profile will be fake or rigged in various different ways. Any statement that is attributed to him will most likely be manipulated or fake. And what will end up happening is we'll slowly find out that he was known to the FBI or on some kind of list somewhere, because everybody in America is on some fucking list or another. The What I think it happens with these things is that the FBI and other American intelligence and police agencies probably have a list of people who can be manipulated or maneuvered into position to stage events like this. Now, here's what we've what we what we've got in terms of proof that the American police and intelligence agencies fake plots routinely. We've got reporting from back in the peak war on terror period, where the FBI under Robert Mueller was done for essentially sending in informants, agents, undercovers into various different mosques in the United States, finding some mentally ill people and manipulating them into saying that they're going to plot some kind of terror attack. The Gretchen Whitmer kidnap plot from a few years back, that some people went to prison for that, but it was found that like over half of the people involved in that particular plot were either FBI agents or informants. So we know that the intelligence agencies manufacture plots out of thin air. They create them for various different reasons, which has been documented. So, is it really that far beyond really that far beyond the realms of our understanding that the FBI and other American intelligence and police agencies would have like a list of people who are ready to pop, so to speak, who are ready to be deployed, to be put into position and arrested, and then a case hung around them? I think that's more than plausible. This is all stuff based on stuff we know that they have done and that they've been done for, even in American bourgeois courts. So this is fake as fuck. This is like some scheme by some particular faction in the American state and the Trump gang to reinvigorate the flagging presidency by pretending that he's, some sort of dangerous figure and that someone's out to get him. Whereas in actual fact, this Trump administration basically resembles what you would have got from any other Republican administration. It's just with different branding, which is all you really got in his first term as well. What you essentially got in Trump's first term is like what a Ted Cruz or a Jeb Bush presidency would have looked like. Because, well, why would it be anything else? And in his second term, well, you get essentially a more aggressive version of that. It's a standard like Republican presidency. Yes, with Trump's personal idiosyncrasies tacked onto it, but that's all it is. He's desperate, and his brand managers are desperate to portray him as some sort of as a dangerous man. He's a danger to the establishment. No, he's not. No, he's not. They don't like him because periodically he's a bit too crude. That was always the basis of their objection to him. Now, are there people out there who would want to assassinate him? Yeah, there are people out there who want to assassinate every president. It's funny, though, that everybody who seems to get close to or actually assassinates a president has such a very extensive history with the American intelligence agencies. I'm thinking particularly, of course, of Lee Harvey Oswald, Sirhan. He didn't kill a president, but he killed the man who probably would have been president. The guy who killed or tried to guy who tried to shoot Reagan. This John Hinckley Jr. This is, funny. It's funny how those who come the closest to killing presidents often have this interesting background of either being intelligence assets or MK Ultra subjects. Thinking also of the big terrorists in America, people like Timothy McVeigh, who was quite clearly a U.S. intelligence asset. So this is fake. This is bullshit. Only worth paying attention to, in the sense that we can see that the wheels now are very much coming off the fake machine, the production machine here. It used to be the case that like they could get away with like false flags and staged events and stuff like that more easily in the past. When there was like very strict control over the narrative. And also I think they used to put a bit more effort into it. These days, it's all fake. It's all easily rumbled. So we'll see. But my prediction is that this guy will be known to the intelligence services and will have a very weird background that's largely made out of whole cloth, basically. So I mean, we don't need much more discussion on it than that. Okay, so I'm just going to greet those who are in the chat thus far. So we have Working Prole Incorporated, we have Caustic Grip, we have Paul from North Wales, Davey from the same part of the world, we have Idmansor Fauzi 1810, a Moroccan in Padua, Italy. Good to have you with us. We have President Jesus from the land of the future President Gavin Newsom. We have Jawad from Poole. We have Wicked Witch of the Southeast from North Carolina. We have Sun Chu. We have Jerry. We have Ben Horse from Toronto. We have Spiral Alice from Ireland. We have Anthony McKeown. We have Mogman Dog. We have Blog El Jeffua. Apologies if I've mangled that. We have Robeson from Newcastle. President Jesus saying this would have been a red wedding I would have supported. Well, for it to be a red wedding, somebody in Trump's inner circle would have needed to sell him out to like Iran or something. There would have needed to have been like a Bruce Bolton character, basically. And yes, I have read all the novels, and yes, the show is garbage. I enjoyed it at the time, but like I watched the show Game of Thrones before I read the books, and then I read the books and thought that was fucking shit, you know. Utter shite. From not just from the last few series. Like it was only good when those two clowns, Benioff and Weiss, literally just sat down and typed out the dialogue from the book. Every time they had to write their own dialogue or improvise or like create a plot point themselves, it went to shit. Like from the first series onwards. If there's enthusiasm for a Game of Thrones review, I can oblige. It's an interesting series of books. I think Martin is an interesting. He did something interesting with the books, and I like the books more as they go along. The more dense and complicated the plot becomes, the more I enjoy it. A lot of people bitch about like the last two books, but I think they're the two best ones, to be honest. Edward, hello to you. We got Frank Horrigan here as well. And hello to Luca. And Angry Prol says, at work, only have a moment to say hi. I'm looking forward to the channel discussion. Side note, I wish you had other means to donate besides outside buy me a coffee. Well, there is a PayPal which I'll advertise, and there is like I'll find other things for people to other means for people to donate to the project through. Sorry. Frank Horrigan says, what's your view of the CPRF saying they don't want 1917 to happen again? Well, I would need to read all of Zyuganov's statements now, but it makes sense given the game that the CPRF is playing at the moment. CPRF, Communist Party of the Russian Federation, is in a sort of awkward, sometimes very awkward alliance with like the Putin-led government at the moment. The way they seem to be playing this is to be constantly asserting that the way to secure victory in Ukraine is to follow, is to adopt their program, their victory program, and to return to practices from the Soviet past. And they're warning. The way I saw a report of what Zyuganov said. I haven't seen the whole thing. So if I'm wrong about this, I'll address it next time. But the way I read it was that it's basically saying that the contradictions in Russian society are mounting up. And essentially what Zyuganov seemed to be trying to do with that speech was to state to the Kremlin that, well, we don't want a 1917 to happen again, but if you carry on this way, it will do. That seems to be what they were saying. And also, if they said they wanted 1917 to happen again, well, quite frankly, then they'd face much more repression than they do at the moment. CPRF, if you read their website, like representatives of theirs get harassed by the Russian state all the time. Like the leadership generally doesn't. Like they don't arrest Zyuganov or any of like the high level guys in the Duma faction of the CPRF, but they do arrest and harass elected representatives and party organizations at the local level. I mean, I don't think Sergei Udaltsov was an actual CPRF member, but he worked with them and he's still in prison. There's other Marxists who work with the Communist Party sometimes who are in prison for like very little. You have to bear in mind that this is the Kremlin group is still a profoundly anti-communist regime. That's where it grew out of. That's where it came from. And it's what they've been forced to do over the years, because there's precious little legitimacy for Russian capitalism. They've been forced to adopt more and more of like the Soviet past as a means of providing a degree of national unity, because the Tsarist past doesn't provide that. But it doesn't mean that they're any less hostile to socialism, and it doesn't mean that they're not ferociously hostile to like working class activity, working class industrial action, working class politics. So the way that the communists in Russia the Communist Party in Russia has chosen to conduct these things is that their analysis is that Russia is under siege from NATO, which is true. That the US imperialists and their bloc allies aim to destroy Russia, which is true. They therefore think that they have analyzed the situation and figure that by aligning with the Bonapartist regime run by Putin, and by couching all of their program in the under the terms of national unity and the need to mobilize society to win the war, that this is essentially a good way to win support away from united Russia, um, alleviate anti-communist any sort of lingering anti-communist elements within like the working class population, perhaps, and coming out and saying we want to overthrow you right now. They've judged that to be not tactically a good decision to make when the country's in a war, when it's being attacked relentlessly, using Ukraine to do the attacking by the imperialist powers. They've decided it's not good to say we want to see 1917 again. Now, all of those decisions I can understand. Whether they're the right decisions, only time will tell. But given the very real restrictions that do exist in Russia, including restrictions put in place by, again, an anti-communist government based on a very anti-communist reactionary constitution that was created by Yeltsin in his anti-constitutional coup of 1993, the communists in Russia stand on somewhat delicate ground. Now, what the correct approach to that is an interesting question. The CPRF's approach for a long time, since its foundation, has been to pursue political gains by bourgeois democratic means, and even allow themselves to be cheated out of the victory they did earn and win in the 1996 Russian presidential election, by essentially saying, and I saw Zyuganov comment on this years later, was that those around Yeltsin would have triggered a civil war had the Communist Party of the Russian Federation refused to accept the result. Now, again, one can question that, and one should question that, but one should also understand the practices of the CPRF since its inception, but also the limitations of it, because the CPRF is based on like Zyuganov and others, who's in his 80s now but still going, who are like, these were never revolutionary figures. In essence, I mean, Zyuganov is like he came up to prominence. I think he got his training in the Brezhnev era, and then he came to prominence under Gorbachev. So he was originally, he was a something of a supporter of perestroika and glasnost. Yeah, he turned on it by 88. But essentially, these are the hierarchy, the older men in the CPRF are all like Brezhnev era officials. So they're not revolutionaries by any means. Even the better of them are like old school Soviet bureaucrats who are actually quite afraid in some respects of class struggle. So bear in mind all of those limitations when looking at the role that the CPRF plays. Edward, who asks, can you explain with an example from a former socialist state asset stripping how it happens, how and to whom money is made and where it ends up, how a DDR Soviet factory becomes capital in New York? Well, the quickest examples we can use are like the demolition of like Ukrainian and a lot of Russian industry in the 90s and the 2000s. So ownership transferred from the state to the through the share scams in Russia in the 90s to like oligarchs like Roman Abramovich and others. Abramovich, I think, made a lot of his money taking possession of steel production. Oleg Deripaska, same thing. So how do you transfer how does it end up as capital in New York and London? Well, first of all, if you in terms of asset stripping, what you do is you take an asset, take like let's say a steel mill, you sack all the workers. Um, well, first of all, what you do is you take possession of it. You also make sure it's you could also make sure it's still a publicly traded company, but you have the majority shareholding. You juice the stock price by firing loads of people, proclaiming a new business plan, and push the stock price up and up and up, and then cash in on that. That's one way of starting an asset stripping model. And then you basically then close it down. You sell it off for scrap, basically. You say you either retain possession of the land or you sell the land as well. You sell all of the machines. You essentially literally like strip it out of all saleable assets. Then you take the money you make from the destruction of means of production and you bank it or invest it in the West. It's quite simple. Like you you sell off everything you can. You make money from sacking people. You pretend you're going to keep it open and then end up closing it. And at each stage, you extract as much money from the process as possible. And then this is the thing the Russian oligarchy was doing. You then bank that money in Cyprus or in a bank in Switzerland or a bank in London or a bank in New York, which is why like Biden was able to seize a load of assets because that's where they stashed all the money. Now, it'd be interesting to go into these to this question in more detail. So, I could like look at examples of like how the DDR was deindustrialized. That'd be something useful to look at. So, but essentially, like you take possession of an asset, you then destroy that asset, sell it off, take the capital you generate from that, and then bank it outside of Russia or the Baltic states or any former socialist country. President Jesus says, with regards to the assassin, the FBI was frantically flying helicopters to his house last night. Oh, interesting. Recovering evidence or planting it? Maybe both. I've seen a picture on Reddit where the shooter was wearing an IDF shirt. Yeah, well, let's yeah, let's see how this works out. Was he like pro-Israel until like last week? You know. Hello to Patrick in Bristol, Jonas Levinson, Cosmos Faber, Peep Show 090, Free Palestine 800 live from London. Wicked Witch of the Southeast says, love the informational videos by country you've been doing, including the one on Germany with Kit Clarenberg today. Yeah, very, very interesting stuff. Have I seen the Palantir Manifesto? I've heard of it. I haven't read it yet. Look, I mean, the thing with this Palantir story is like a lot of people like, you see that dickhead Varoufakis going, it's techno feudalism turned to the max on steroids. It's like, look, the thing with like Palantir and like the tech bro stuff is, yeah, there's a lot. Alex Karp is a creepy motherfucker. There's no doubt about that. They all are creepy, weird, oddball characters. The thing about it is, though, a lot of their stuff they do is hyping their share price. Like they got a lot of like attention out of that issuing some manifesto, which is probably bullshit. And like a lot of the stuff that Palantir does is scamming. So I haven't read it yet, but I'll read it and comment on it next week. I think mostly I regard Palantir and the other tech companies as consummate scam artists, capable of like generating a lot of attention, capable of getting a lot of money out of the American state machine, But in terms of like everyone shitting themselves, going, "Oh, Alex Karp's fascism is not too far away." Of course, I wouldn't underestimate the man's like proclivities towards fascism, but mainly they're just scam artists. Mainly, Idman Sor Fawzi says, "What is the current situation of the Russian comrades within Russia, but also in Donbass and Donetsk and Lugansk?" Well, from what I can tell, like the KPRF, CPRF has like quite well established branches in Donetsk and Lugansk. And also, bear in mind, there was a strong Ukrainian Communist Party influence there in the what was the east of Ukraine. All the way through the 90s. In fact, as I've mentioned before, like Communist Party of Ukraine was another one that was scammed out of victories in the 1990s by like fucking mafia types. In the Russian case, it's the Yeltsin mafia. In Ukraine's case, it's the Kushma mafia. And the Communist Party of Ukraine was strong enough to win parliamentary elections. In fact, I think they became the single largest party on a couple of occasions in the 90s. And like the elections were essentially like there was some severe rigging going on to prevent them becoming bigger than they getting the parliamentary representation that they deserve, because the Communist Party of Ukraine was actually very well organized in the 1990s. It had its severe flaws, as does the CPRF today, and then like including like reformism, sort of Brezhnevite cadres running it. But they were very well organized. They had, back in the 90s, there was still a more extensive industrial base. They had a lot of industrial workers on board. They had a lot of like petty bourgeois types on board as well. So like, as I've mentioned before, when you get to 2004 and you get Westerners going on about like how Kushma was an election rigger, yeah, he was, but they didn't mention who he was rigging the election against. It was the Communist Party of Ukraine. I think it's Petr Simonenko was the leader. He was their perpetual presidential candidate. Came close to winning at least once, maybe twice. I'd need to check up on that. But the election rigging was against the communists. Now, again, like the Communist Party of Ukraine didn't make too big an issue out of the blatant election rigging, and that, in reflection, that was a terrible mistake, because what it did by essentially going along with the Eastern oligarchy, because there was a whole part, Yanukovych's party, the party of the regions, was set up mainly to split the Communist Party of Ukraine's vote in the East by putting up like well-funded oligarch-backed candidates who essentially ran on a sort of social democratic platform and were staffed by, again, mostly ex-Soviet officials. But then again, there's a lot of people involved in Ukraine are ex-Soviet officials, including, of course, the first post-Maidan, or the second, technically, post-Maidan president. The Many of them were old CPSU members, so bear that in mind. But yeah, the Communist Party of Ukraine very strong, particularly in the east of what was once Ukraine, and so it wouldn't surprise me if a strong communist presence emerged from the end of this war, whenever this war ends. More on that later. Antonis Pass says, "Let the contradictions destroy the bourgeois state and not be their ally, maybe." Well, contradictions alone don't destroy things. Contradictions can mount up, but things can survive. Like, again, like, one can raise questions about the decisions the KPRF has made, but you can understand why they have been made. You always have to ask yourself the question. It's like, if you're going to engage in a revolutionary struggle, do you have the capability to do so? It's an open question whether the KPRF does have that. But again, contradictions alone don't destroy bourgeois rule. It needs action. It needs He needs the vanguard party at the head of an organized working class to destroy the bourgeois state. You don't get it any other way. Hello to Christopher Rogers in Hong Kong. Randy Terpstra says, good afternoon, comrades. Riot and revolution make until the government crumbles so we can establish a dictatorship of the proletariat. Well, revolutions need not be a riot, but generally they do come with them. Wicked Witch of the Southeast says, I read from Russian comrades that Lenin's tomb is covered every time there's any national, international event held there. Yeah. It's a matter of controversy between the Kremlin and the KPRF every year. It's a funny reversal of things, because in the Soviet period, Lenin, well, a cardboard cutout version of Lenin, basically, not the real Lenin and his real legacy, was sort of held up as, the great leader who we all want to follow in his footsteps. Stalin was vilified. Now you've got more positive Stalin coverage in the Russian mainstream or Russian bourgeois media, and Lenin is still unacceptable. Because, Putin talks shit about Lenin because that's what the clique he represents wants to hear said. But interestingly enough, Stalin is still incredibly popular amongst the Russian working class. Lenin increasingly is as well, because Russian workers are getting a good look at what the post Lenin and Stalin world became, and discovering that whatever problems there were in the Soviet Union, and there were many, what replaced it was utter shite and a complete retreat, basically. So the Soviet Union had not reached socialism. It was that was Khrushchev's foolish and opportunistic ravings about that. Never mind developed socialism, which was the sort of ideological justifications of the Brezhnev era. What it was a society that was in transition. It was non-capitalist, but it wasn't socialist yet. It was on a path that could have led it to socialism eventually, but that was derailed by essentially derailed by the Khrushchev intervention, and then slid off the rails for the next 30 years until Gorbachev was the one who finished it off. But yes, Lenin is still the one they don't know what to do with. I mean, if the counter-revolutionaries around Putin had their way, they would destroy Lenin's tomb, but they know it would produce too negative a response, so they'll just try and pretend it's not there. Hugh Morgan says, can you do a special on Spiked and Brendan O'Neill? That would just involve me saying Brendan O'Neill is a fucking prick for an hour and a half. So if you want to see that, I'm more than willing to do it. Hello to Speedy Bozo from Sheffield. Homie Sly says, do you have a link to the intro track list? I'm looking for the song in a countdown around about 7. Okay. I did have it somewhere. I will try and track it down and post it. Wicked Witch of the Southeast says, how did companies go from state-run to publicly traded? That's where I have such the disconnect, such as when you described this type of theft in Syria and getting privatized. Who allows this? Well, in terms of Syria, it was just decreed. I did that special on Syria on Patreon. I'm going to follow up with another one soon, with part 2. And this is an essential problem. The companies in Russia, in the former Soviet Union, were nominally, if you read the Soviet Constitution of 1977, I think it was, which is what the RSFSR constitution was based on, which is the constitution ultimately that Russia became independent under in 1991 when the counter-revolution destroyed the Soviet Union. If you read that, it says that all the factory and land belongs to the people. Here's the problem, though. You can say that in a document, but who controls it in practice? Now, who controls it in practice was the bureaucracy, was the managerial layer. who had by over generations formed essentially mafia-like control over the industries. If you look at what happened, let's go back to Ukraine again. Where did like Leonid Kushma, who's still alive, by the way, that fucker's like 90 odd, really evil piece of shit. Like, if there's anybody outside of like the Zelensky clique and people like Poroshenko, the former CPSU member, the like people like Kushma is an absolute criminal of the lowest kind. He's still involved somewhere in the background of the Zelensky regime, I think. But I believe he was an engineer by background who got a job. He was like a manager of one of the biggest steelworks in Ukraine, I think. Yanukovych, again, was an engineer. He was also a manager. So what happened was, like, the Constitution of the Soviet Union said that all the factories, mines, land, all the means of production belonged to the Soviet people. Problem, though, you didn't have the dictatorship of the proletariat in the Soviet Union. You hadn't had it for a long time by the time the 80s rolled around. And so the working class, as we've covered before in the Soviet Union, have been depoliticized and demobilized to the point where, like, mobilization meant marching around on May Day parades. It didn't mean that the working class actually ran anything. And the party itself had become deproletarianized for a long, long time. So you can say that the land and the factories belong to the people. Okay, how do the people actually exercise that right? Because they can't. Because, like, the trade unions in the Soviet Union were essentially there to deal with, like, the management of strikes, but also, like, dealing out welfare benefits, etc. The management, the running of the enterprises fell into the hands of people like Kushma, who that was the layer where the counter-revolution came from. It was the people who had direct control over the factories in senior management positions often. They already had like an illegal economy, the shadow economy, in the Soviet Union, where they were running private businesses on the side, diverting factory and state resources to make private profit on the side. Now, what happens is that's the layer, this sort of senior management layer, that whilst they gained a lot of privileges from their position, they abused their position, they profited from illegal trade that they were able to do thanks to their position. They didn't constitute a class as of yet because they didn't own the things. There was no ownership there. They were extracting benefits from their position in, like, the chain of command in the factories, but they didn't own anything. That's the layer that moved with, like, Kravchuk in Ukraine and Yeltsin in first Gorbachev and then Yeltsin in Russia to dissolve the Soviet Union so that they could take possession. See, if you're a senior manager in 1992 in Ukraine, like, you are one of the few people who understands where the supplies come from. So let's use the example of the steelworks again. You are one of the few people in the system that understands where, like, if you're running the steel mill, you understand where the raw resources come from. Where does the iron come from? Where does the coal to fire the furnaces come from, if that indeed is what they were powered on? Where does how do we link into the rail system? How do we organize road transportation for our finished product? If you know that, you've already got a lot of control over the process of production. And also, a lot of these people have been building up, thanks to their illegal trading and the shadow economy, a certain amount of capital already. That and the fact that these assets, when they came into the possession of the Russian and Ukrainian states, were let go for pennies on the dollar. Like, they were sold off really cheaply so that, like, the senior managers in them could buy them. And also, the Yeltsin regime, I'm not sure if this was also done in Ukraine, but in Russia, they ran a dodgy share scheme where workers and ordinary citizens were given like paper shares in former state-run industries at the same time as like the Russian working class was impoverished by the collapse in the value of the currency and mass unemployment. So these people, the working class, sold their paper shares in the former state-run industries, and they were all bought up on the cheap by the people who became the oligarchy. So that's how they got control. They got control a lot of the time by already being senior managers in a certain industry, having a certain amount of capital that they'd accumulated via illegal means, and being in a position where they could hoover up the paper shares that were offered to the population and establish effective control over the industry that way. I mean, the Yeltsin era was like a fire sale of Russian state assets, which ultimately led to asset stripping and deindustrialization, and essentially the replacement of Soviet manufactured goods with German, French, and American, but mainly German and French and European manufactured goods. Now that's been replaced by like Chinese manufactured goods. I hope that. I mean, in Syria, it was a matter of decrees of the president, decrees of Assad. We decree that this is now privatized. And done. No working class role in that whatsoever, except to get stiffed by the Baathists, basically. What is my view of Eamon de Valera, says Spiral Alice. Interesting figure. Ultimate, I mean, a man of a high degree of bravery. I mean, he did fight in the Easter Rising. Ultimately, though, he oversaw the creation of an Irish state, the Irish Republic, which was a little bit more free than the Irish Free State. He did try, and this is on the positive side, he did try to establish more of an Irish industrial base because Ireland got deindustrialized after independence due to that a lot of industries closed down and fled, and Ireland was again the British wanted to reduce it to a sort of agricultural neo-colony. De Valera tried to do import substitution. He tried to have like a viable capitalist Ireland, and ultimately that didn't work. It didn't work, and so what ultimately happened was, I think it was after De Valera's retirement and death, Ireland goes into the European Union. And Ireland goes into the European Union and basically becomes a center of real estate and financial services. Because ultimately, De Valera's like developmentalist import substitution model failed. So a man of certain strong convictions, he had like an image of Ireland as this independent, almost autarkic, very Catholic country that built its own industrial base to go along with its considerable agricultural base. Ultimately, though, it did not work. You couldn't make an independent, strong capitalist Ireland except on the terms which the imperialists were prepared to give you, which was join the EU and become a center for financialization, speculation, and real estate, which is why Ireland's now in the mess that it's in. And increasingly become more and more allied with US imperialism and aligned with NATO. Because for the smaller nations, if you're going to go down the capitalist road, which is what Ireland is on and has been since before independence, but and in terms of like Irish independence from Britain, it's been a capitalist country, and the kind of capitalism that you're going to breed there is weak, run by compradors, or just run by capital that's British or American or European, French, German mainly, and what you end up with is the kind of capitalism they're prepared to give you, which is again real estate speculation and financialization, which is what is what together with an increasingly impoverished agricultural sector is what the capitalist class is, what the imperialists are prepared to give Ireland in terms of a capitalist economy. James Connolly was right, which is that you can have a flag, you can have an anthem, you can have a government, but ultimately, if you are your economy is controlled from outside of the country, then the independence you have is going to be compromised, which is what De Valera ultimately gives Ireland. It's an independence which, whilst a step forward from British rule, is very compromised by the fact that it remained within the bounds of capitalism. What's your opinion on the IMF Venezuela announcement? Can we now state that Venezuela has gone comprador? Well, it doesn't look good, does it? I mean, I saw a lot of people saying, I saw Craig Murray's report on the pressure on Rodriguez, etc. I I go back to like the abduction of Maduro. A lot of things still don't seem right about that. Something fundamentally was wrong there. This IMF thing. Look, once you go into debt with them, that's you are well on the way just to being a slave, a debt slave. Okay, you are. The purpose of taking IMF loans is never to help the nation develop. It is to enslave it. I mean, this is what happened with that wretch Moreno in Ecuador when he took like a $4 billion IMF loan. That was to basically make sure it didn't need it. The state didn't need it after the Correa years, where there was some progress made. You take those basically to beggar yourself and get tied into the Washington-led system. That's why you take those. And the Venezuelan government is taking those, says that there is a consensus within it that wants to be locked into the Washington-led system. Now, quite what role that Rodriguez and others played in the abduction of Maduro, I don't know. But all the decisions taken since then stink, basically. And I know a lot of people are saying, well, keep the faith, and it's not just about the leaders, and that's true. There are a lot of revolutionaries in Venezuela. There are a lot of people who want to keep the legacy, the positive legacies of Chavez alive. A lot of people want to take it further. Quite how that chimes with the leadership preaching wage restraint and like getting into debt with the International Monetary Fund, well, that doesn't seem to work to me. Further research needed on that question, though. Edward says in Riga, January 91, there was an identical false flag attack event as in Romania in 1989 and Kiev 2014. I'm currently translating material into English so you and Kit can analyze it. Yeah, we've got a book on the Riga events. We need to talk about it in more detail. Yeah, but identical sniper event happened in Romania in 89, Riga 91, Kiev 2014. Same tactics each time. I mean, Ivan Kachanovsky, the exiled Ukrainian academic who works in Canada now, has comprehensively proved that it was fascist forces aligned with the US ultimately that did the shootings in Kiev in 2014. It wasn't the Yanukovych government, which was doing everything it could to avoid an escalation. Bruce Albert says, large-scale NATO-backed terrorists defeated at capital of Mali, West Africa. Yes, going to be looking at that in a video coming up this week. Frank says, you see that the US is mandating AI surveillance on all cars starting in 2027 using the excuse of drunk and lazy driving. Well, this is the logical extension of what they've been doing for 25 years. They're creating like surveillance states, and they've created one already. For many years, they've been doing this, and they've been doing this because, again, they have desperately wanted to reverse what they see, the ruling class sees as the defeats of the 20th century, having to give certain degree of political rights to the proletariat. They are desperate to make sure that their rule is never threatened. And one of the ways to do that is to prevent threats emerging before they become threats. So comprehensive surveillance, comprehensive police state, routine psychological manipulation, all of that, all designed to make sure that nothing can conceivably challenge their rule. That's the way that these things go. It won't work. None of it will work. In the end, none of it will work. And the reason why none of it will work is because once the masses start to actually move, all the surveillance in the world can't stop them. That's the thing. Now, what they can do is forestall it via mass repression, mass arrests, etc. But even like the most repressive states in the world ultimately like run out of juice. Like there was nothing more vicious than or very powerful than the Savak in Iran, and ultimately that fell apart. That regime fell apart anyway. It will fail in the US too. Luca says, I'm reading Hegel's Shorter Logic from the Encyclopedia and finding it very interesting and powerful. No wonder Marx first and Lenin later engaged with this work. Yep. Special program coming up on Lenin's engagement with Hegel. That'll be on the Patreon side. Hello to Jenny, our moderator who joins us. WikiWitch of the Southeast says you got something out of that answer. That's good. Can I talk about Burrow Telly says, well, can I talk about Wall Street funding the Bolsheviks? I've heard this in right wing space and don't know much about it. Well, I can talk about it in more detail, but like it's a complete mythology. It's based on like mostly nonsense. There was some American investment in the Soviet Union in the early new economic policy era. It's based on that essentially. When there was like limited capitalism allowed in the Soviet Union under Lenin and then Stalin, in the Lenin and Stalin eras, there was some limited Wall Street investment there, sought by the Bolsheviks in order to get hold of like American industrial production methods and adapt them. But that's the limit of the involvement there. Bear in mind, this story falls apart when you consider that the US imperialists staged a very aggressive intervention and tried to actually seize thousands and thousands of miles worth of like Soviet land in the Far East. Like there was US troops deployed into the Far East to do an intervention. So you wouldn't do that if you were actually funding it. And when you confront a right winger about that, just pull this look that says, well, that's all part of the game, because it's all nonsense. All nonsense. All right, what else we got here? Will I ever do a Marxist analysis of Lord of the Rings? Well, I watched Rings of Power recently. That's an interesting program, to say the very least. I need to reread the book first. Were you thinking like review of the films or review of the book or both? Hello to Sligo Conrad from Ireland. Hexogan says, any good books on how US embargo pushed Cuba heavily onto being reliant on the USSR? Did Castro never anticipate US reacting this way? I'd need to go back and look at it, but basically Cuba in 1959 was essentially had two things that its economy was based on: sugar and tourism, like the kind of tourism that Jeffrey Epstein would be fond of. And so trying to industrialize was going to be hard. Now I'm not. What I need to do is I need to look up. There was some work done by an academic called Helen Yaff on Che's analysis of like the Cuban economy. There was some industrialization done. A lot of what was done though was selling of Cuban sugar to to the Soviet Union in return for manufactured goods. And when the Soviet Union was destroyed in a counter-revolution, like that trade dried up. I saw recently, like the Cubans had made certain breakthroughs. I mean, they made certain breakthroughs. I mean, the Cuban medical system's well acclaimed by almost everybody other than like bitter capitalists. They've also made a breakthrough recently in refining their heavy oil because there are oil deposits in and around Cuba that I mean, their refinery was out of date or something, and they finally got to updating it. I mean, for what it's worth on this current crisis, I think the Cubans will survive it because, like, whatever flaws Cuba has, like, they still have like a strong mass communist party that understands, or at least appears to understand, the difficulty and understands the necessity of like hard work amongst the masses, so that like the reactionaries, and they're prepared to mobilize en masse against the reactionaries and the paid agents of imperialism. So I think they'll get through it. I think that the Chinese seem to have moved to being prepared to like supply them with energy alternatives. If they can maximize the usage of like their own oil deposits, that'd be useful. I mean, there's been talk of the US doing some kind of invasion there, but I can't see that going very well. If the Cubans are prepared to do what the Venezuelans, for whatever reason, weren't prepared to do, which is basically say to the US, "Well, fucking come on, then let's have you," as Castro was in the early 1960s. The US won't do it. Bear in mind, the US has just been fucking mauled by Iran. Like an Iranian F-5, which is a fighter plane produced in like the late 1950s, bombed American bases in the first few days of the war because the Iranian missiles had destroyed all the air defenses. So a nation like Iran, which I think is more militarily developed than Cuba, but Cuba would be a nightmare to invade because it's an island. You've got to have like amphibious landings there. You would take hundreds of thousands of men to carry this out. The US doesn't have that kind of power. I mean, Trump was thinking that he's going to do another Venezuela operation, but I think it's pretty fucking clear that the Venezuela operation by this stage was dependent upon internal treachery, not super weapons or like the disruptor gun or something like that, but just good old fashioned way that the US does these things, which is spreading a lot of dollars around, finding internal traitors and doing it that way. If the Cuban government stays solid and like there's no internal treachery, then you won't see the US doing anything other than terrorism, which is bad enough. Terrorism, sabotage, blockade, etc. And if Cuba's friends are serious about supporting Cuba with oil, and also helping them develop their grid to be less dependent upon oil imports. So developing their own oil industry more, developing like the Chinese are helping with mass solar power, very sunny place, Cuba. You can actually use mass solar power there for powering of residential districts. Then Cuba will survive. It will be difficult, but I can't see the Trump gang or whoever replaces him going in for a massive ground invasion of Cuba. That's just not how the US wants to fight its wars. They bit off way more than they could chew with Iran. They've now got no way out. I see that the Grey Zone sent somebody to the area where they reportedly rescued that pilot, and it seems to have been an attempt at doing some sort of insane special forces operation, which failed and was driven out. So the US could stage an invasion of Cuba, certainly, but it would take hundreds of thousands of men. It would take a massive mobilization. It would take massive production of war materials, because I think the Cubans would resist very effectively. And it would cost the US an awful lot. And they've already fucked themselves by waging a war in Iran that they can't win. So, If Trump does that, then he's even more stupid than and Hegseth, and he's even more stupid and potentially on something than I thought. Incidentally, Hegseth was looking completely off his chump there from that in that footage from the correspondence dinner the other night. But I think most of the Trump administration is on something. For Frank Horrigan says, Fortune Andrei Zhdanov. I'm hoping to buy his selected work soon. Some claim he was going to be Stalin's successor. Well, I mean, I haven't read a lot of Zhdanov. I know that he was an interesting character who was raising questions about the reformism and the compromises of the Western communist parties. Some ambiguity as to how he died. Some say it might have been a murder. Some say he basically drank himself to death. It's an interesting one because it's one of many what ifs, but like the what if Zhdanov had lived and succeeded Stalin. But I think that this is doing sort of ignoring the fundamental cause of Khrushchevism. The fundamental cause of Khrushchevism was the power of the senior managers, senior party officials, bureaucrats of all varieties. That's where Khrushchevism came from. And the fact was that the working class was not organized enough and politicized enough to stop Khrushchev's capitulations to imperialism and to internal enemies as well, like his release of like Ukrainian Banderites, for instance, which is utterly criminal. So Zhdanov would have been faced with the same problems that Malenkov and Molotov and others were faced, which is that this is an argument I think Grover Fair has made, which is that by the end of his life, Stalin was actually a very isolated figure. Like Stalin, Kaganovich, Molotov, etc., were in a minority in that Politburo. That Politburo mostly consisted of opportunists by that stage. Interesting discussion to be had as to why, but it had Zhdanov lived, it's questionable whether he would have had the power to actually take over, given that essentially Khrushchev managed to seize power first in a triumvirate and then more solo, and basically set in to kickstart the process, which would conclude with capitalist restoration. Because of the balance of power in the party by the early 1950s was decisively on the side of senior bureaucrats and not on the side of the working class. Again, we could go on for hours and hours about that. Right. What else we got here? Road to Hell 46 says, can you discuss the contradiction between the EU, which promotes German industrial hegemony over Europe, and NATO, which serves as keep the Germans down, as the saying goes? Well, does it? I mean, it did 50 years ago. Like, that was like part of it. But it never really kept the Germans that down because, like, several of its senior officials were German, even from the earliest period. I mean, that's like a British desire, keeping the Germans down from the 40s. I think they had to accept the return of Germany as a power, really, from the late 40s onwards, when the Americans decreed that there would be a West Germany and it would be remilitarized. Now, though, like, things changed. Like the EU, before it was the European Economic Community, before it became the EU, it was not originally dominated by Germany, but it became dominated by Germany. Now, a remilitarized Germany, which, again, they're faced with difficulties with regard to remilitarization because there's all kinds of contradictory things going on inside Germany. But assuming they start remilitarizing successfully, well, then it will mean that NATO essentially becomes more and more Germanic. And you will get the return of demands for like Eurocorps, the European Army, which would essentially be a Franco-German-led operation with probably the Eastern Europeans cast in the role of cannon fodder. I don't think NATO really did keep Germany down. Not really. I mean, the Germans shied away from like full-scale remilitarization for a while, but they were very heavily involved in the breakup of Yugoslavia because there's a lot of German interests there that they wanted to extend, and they were very heavily involved in the war on Serbia, 1999. So I don't think they did keep Germany down. I mean, in reality, NATO will become more and more German as remilitarization takes hold. And NATO and the EU complement each other. Now, there's contradictions there in that, like, there are still some in the US and in Britain who are perhaps uneasy about German remilitarization. But given that German remilitarization principally will be targeted at Russia, I think they'll put those concerns on the back burner for now. Mr. Xavier Rises says, if Iran wins the conflict against Israel and the Zionist state collapses, how would it affect the Comprador government in Lebanon? Which Comprador Arab state will you see falling first in this war? Well, I would say that Lebanon's the most vulnerable because it's the most glaringly contradictory situation, which is that you have an active and successful resistance movement in the form of Hezbollah and its allies. And you end up, and what you have in the government is a deliberately engineered comprador regime and under a constitution which is designed to entrench that. So if Zionism is defeated, if the US is defeated, then they'll be probably, they or that clown who runs Syria will be the first to go. Because certainly, but Lebanon is even more vulnerable. It's just a question of like, well, what force will challenge it? I mean, Hezbollah could challenge it, but they are, for reasons that are understandable, unwilling to engage in that kind of internal conflict when the Zionists are still a threat. If the Zionists are no longer a threat, then the power of the comprador bourgeoisie will wither away because that is their power is dependent upon their relationship with US imperialism. If US imperialism is defeated, then the compradors across the region will suffer a massive setback, but they'll be the most vulnerable to it. But don't be surprised if Saudi Arabia disappears quickly as well, quite far quicker than one might imagine. Mogman Dog says, book please, Rings of Power and the Hobbit movie are shameless ashtrays and belong in the trash. Bread and circuses for the CGI fireworks addicted Funko Pop collecting upper middle class, though. Yes. The book I love. Lord of the Rings, the book, is great. I saw a very good fan edit of The Hobbit, which is where somebody cut it down to like a 4-hour edit, cut out Orlando Bloom entirely, almost entirely, cut out all the stupid like elf dwarf romance subplot shit and just focused on the book, because Jackson did actually put all the elements of the book in there. He just covered it in bullshit for the edification of like the slop addicts out there. And there's a lot of people who like slop. It's no wonder there's going to be like CGI film stars and AI film stars and AI plots. Right. Randy Terpstra says, the only reason and times the move towards communism has been delayed is when the forces of reaction have staged counter-revolutions against it. That's true, but then again, also that the forces of communism have made terrible mistakes, which was always is going to be the case. I mean, the violent resistance of the ruling class is something which we can easily anticipate being a thing, but also like how we as communists respond to that violence is hasn't always been good. There's been many mistakes made, and I could go into those in future episodes. Hello to you. Are free to do as we tell you. Thank you for tuning in. Rodale says, follow-up question, won't Germany have problems remilitarizing given that they've been so deindustrialized with the destruction of Nord Stream? There'll be certain problems there, undoubtedly. I need to look more into this. There's certain barriers to it, which could be overcome by ruthless restructuring of the labor force, but it will take a heavy amount of state direction. But also, one of the biggest barriers is like Germany's becoming. I mean, German imperialism has been based on the export of commodities for a long time, but also you do have tendencies towards deindustrialization there because that's an baked in part of capitalism anyway, a tendency towards deindustrialization. Funnily enough, they'll have to do a heavily state directed and state funded remilitarization if it's going to work at all. I mean, the ideas of Merz and Schultz seems to have been, well, we'll just give loads of money to Rheinmetall and see what happens. But I don't think that's going to come off for them. Hexagon says, with advances of social cybernetics and control schemes, I don't see any chance for a revolution, especially considering welfare and subsistence being well covered. Well, it's not well covered, though, is it? If you look at like the way in which Trump is going about things, if you look at the way in which there's going to be a real demand for active suppression of the living standards of the working class soon. I mean, admittedly, one of the things that almost everybody got wrong about the welfare system and welfare capitalism was just how long it would last. It's not been in the interest of the ruling class to completely do away with it. It's getting to the point, though, now where they will start to threaten that. Be interesting to see and experience how far they can go with that. But I disagree with you. Like, there's been all kinds of societies with very advanced systems of social control and various stages of technology. But fundamentally, if the masses revolt, you can have all kinds of technological schemes in place. But fundamentally, it's like the illusion of some in like the British military that they can fight a war purely with drones. You can't. Even in the Ukraine war, it shows that like to take a whole territory, you need men, you need soldiers. To do anything in a workplace, you still need people. This is like the fantasy that the sort of the Varoufakis have, which is that oh well, you know, people are going to be replaced by machines completely. Well, then there won't be capitalism anymore. There won't be anything anymore. Fundamentally, I saw somebody sent me a message. It was on Patreon about like being terrified about the replacement of humans by AI. Well, the AI depends on human labor. Like AI systems depend on human labor, not just humans running it, but human inputs. Like every single capitalist wave of technological innovation has been used to increase productivity by doing more with fewer higher paid workers and more very low paid workers. It's used to de-skill people and re-employ them on lower wages, basically. That's every wave of innovation has been used to do that from like the 1840s onwards. Produce more with fewer workers that are higher paid and re-employ people who've been laid off on much lower wages and keep a permanent reserve army of labor. That's the way that these things go. How do small organizations go against well-funded nudge units? Quite easily, in fact. And then they arrest or threaten people like Dr. Bra. Well, yes. I'm going to talk more about that in future episodes, so Hexagon. So put a pin in that one. I'll come back to it. Caustic Grip says, I don't think Varoufakis ever read Marx, especially the fragments on machines. I don't think Varoufakis has read much of anything other than, you know, I'm reminded of an old line from Garth Marenghi comedy show that was on like 25 years ago in Britain, where the main character says, I'm one of the few people who has written more books than he's read. It's me and Jeffrey Archer. I'll add into that one Yanis Varoufakis. He appears to not have understood anything about Marx at all. I don't think he's read any. He might have read some Marx, but I don't think he understood it. I don't think he understood Marx about like waves of innovation, usage of technology, etc. But every time that there's a wave of innovation, your same things occur, which is like people can turn up and go, "Oh, we're all fucked. We can't do anything. The power of the state is too great. The power of the capitalists is too great. We can't do anything." And it's always wrong. It's always wrong. Now, I could do a program on why that is wrong, so I'll put a pin in that one as well. Wicked Rich of the Southeast, I agree with you when you say gloom and doom, Greek tragedy, dystopian talk is anti-Marxist. Marxism is anti-Marxist, yes. Etu Sanchez. Pedro Sanchez? Okay. Well, so I'm going to draw things to a conclusion for this evening. I have various things I need to go and do. But thanks to the 500 plus of you watching on the various different platforms. It's always good to have you with us. I'll be back with you again next Sunday at 7. There will be a couple of Decline and Fall shows coming up for you this week. We're going to have videos on the channel on the privatization scams in Britain, on the miserable career and fate of Keir Starmer, and maybe a couple of other things as well. Thank you for watching tonight. I'm catching up finally with uploading all the audios of all the videos onto Patreon, and we've got a Patreon Q&A coming up tomorrow, so be sure to join me for that one. Thanks to everybody who supports the show on Patreon, Substack, and Buy Me a Coffee. I'll be back with you with a video tomorrow, but until then, thank you for watching, and good night.
Утреннего стяг в жизни важен первый шаг. Слышишь, веют над страною ветры яростных атак. И вновь продолжает собой, и сердцу тревожно в груди. И Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди. И Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди. Весть летит во все концы, вы поверьте нам, отцы. Будут новые победы, станут новые бойцы. Милости не жди, жизнь для правды не щади. Нам, ребята, в этой жизни только с правдой по пути.
И вновь продолжает